ActionSA on the other side originally, or could have stood with the DA, but said that the DA insisted on its own mayoral candidate rather than ActionSA's, and this means it's reconsidering its participation in the moonshot pact. And remember, the moonshot pact is all about ensuring that the ANC and EFF do not go into a governing coalition after the national elections next year. So the DA has mooted that and asked all parties to talk about standing together as an alternative and preventing any such coalition between the ANC and the EFF. All right, we have the DA's national spokesperson, Werner Horn, now to give us a response. Mr. Horn, were you able to hear what ActionSA said? Basically, that the DA dug in its heels and ensured that an Al-Jama candidate was ultimately elected.
Good evening. Yes, thank you. I was able to catch the interview. I don't think we necessarily agree with the assessment of Mr. Bowman as to what transpired in Johannesburg. In our assessment, it's quite clear that ultimately the Patriotic Alliance stayed true to colours and was always, as is the case with them, in these negotiations, playing both sides, and decided to stick with what we believe ultimately is their natural alliance partners, the ANC and the EFF.
He says, however, that the Patriotic Alliance was willing to support an ActionSA candidate. So that would have meant that the DA and ActionSA, with the help of the PA, could have got the numbers. He says that the DA was not keen on that, and ultimately, there was no way, even if ActionSA supported the DA, the numbers weren't there. So why didn't you go for, in this case, it would have been surely the expedient, logical option if you wanted the numbers?
Well, firstly, once again, I think there's a bit of an oversimplification.
Yeah. Well, explain it to me. Could you have had the numbers behind Dr. Mpopalatse? Was that at all possible?
Well, we don't think it was at all possible because we don't believe the PA ultimately would have stuck with this coalition. The fact that they, in the end, voted with the ANC and the EFF, in our view, showed their true colours. And remember, we made it clear that the one precondition we would put for before considering accommodating the PA again in their coalition is for the PA to at least start the process of breaking itself free from the ANC in other coalitions they hold, and for that the PA was not prepared. So once again, looking towards stability, maybe on a theoretical basis, there could have been a vote where somebody other than the ANC puppet candidate could have won on the day. Whether that would have brought stability, we doubt it very much. The PA has time and again shown that when it matters, they do not consider these agreements specific with parties other than the ANC to be binding and more permanent in nature.
All right, so on the face of it, it seemed like the DA was simply insisting that its own mayoral candidate had to be elected. Otherwise, there was no deal. You're saying it's more complicated than that because you didn't trust the motives of the PA that would have given you the numbers anyway, even if there had been a compromise. But to end off, is that still the DA's stance, that you will always want the mayoral chair, even if there are other options?
Well, I think let me contextualize this to the whole issue of the moonshot pact, which is really, I think, what this conversation would have been about tonight, and to say that the ideal is, of course, to enter into negotiations long before one has to possibly enter into government, so that you can remove the emotion, you can remove the immediacy, you can remove the scramble that we saw in Johannesburg. And that is exactly why our party leader, John Steenhuisen, this week met with a number of party leaders. Mr. Mashaba was there, and agreed upon 10 talking points in respect of which all party leaders will now give input to set up the convention that hopefully will conclude in a moonshot pact. And it's that type of calm, measured, calculated approach to coalitions, which ultimately would bring stability and hopefully would carve out a path to a majority for the moonshot pact. And I think then, and that's our experience from what South Africans have told us, it's less important as to who ultimately would be the flag bearer of this moonshot pact. The importance is that there's a broad agreement on principles, on values, on policies.
Mr. Horn, I think what happened in Joburg is very relevant, because that is why ActionSA is saying it's reconsidering its involvement in the moonshot pact. Fair enough, you're saying that ultimately it doesn't matter who's in leadership. It seems to many South Africans that that's always the issue amongst politicians these days. Before we let you go, so are you saying that the moonshot pact you think can be saved?
No, well, we're very positive still about the moonshot pact. We, of course, are emboldened by the sense of hope and of expectation that it has let loose amongst ordinary South Africans. We've never expected this to be a linear path, something that will be delivered on a plate to us. But Mr. Beaumont referred to the burden of responsibility, and I would say that all political parties who listen to South Africans and who know that change must now come to save this country, must now take up the burden and come together. And in that sense, we're in early days. We are a bit saddened to hear that that ActionSA is reconsidering their stance. We hope that they will ultimately come to the proper insight that this is but a bump in the road, and that we must look to the betterment of South Africa and not to our short-term warts, scratches, and bumps.
All right, National Alliance, Democratic Alliance, National Spokesperson Werner Horn, thank you for your response tonight. We'll continue to follow the politics playing out in municipalities and the implications that has for how parties are positioning themselves ahead of next year's very crucial national elections.